You know, so like the leadership emerges and continues to emerge.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a lot. Yeah. I feel like I'm distracting you. Right?
Oh, I'm just making sure.
You two are still co-presidents.
Well, no, I was never co-president with
No, it was your. I went So I was going to ask you.
Let me know if you ever want to process. Yeah. Please do.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, it sure did, and I might have to call them turn it this way when
Yeah.
down here.
Whenever you're ready, they're ready for us whenever.
Paul, do you want to?
You ready? Are you ready? Yeah. Getting our live feed set up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, here's more.
There we go. Hi, everybody.
Hey, everybody, welcome to Martyr.
This is Renee Nancy. She is the president of the Old Town Teachers Organization. Yeah. And that's kind of lame.
Welcome to our event today where we get to hear some wonderful stories and learn some history all together and celebrate Mark Guarino's new book, Country and Midwestern. I'm about 150 pages deep and I love it so much, and I would be a lot further if I hadn't gone to a folk music conference for a few days prior to this. Anyways, we get to hear a little bit with Ed Holstein and Ted Johnson and Paul Collins, and I'm excited. I hope you guys are too.
So a couple things that I wanted to mention. First of all, this event is sponsored by the OTTO Teachers Organization. We are a registered union, local number 909 of the Illinois Federation of Teachers and the American Federation of Teachers. Thank you so much for supporting unions in general and our union in particular. And on each table, you'll notice a flyer that has 3 instructions for you. If you care to support the work of OTTO, our union, we come into the new world with that barcode thing there, the QR code, so you can use your phone to actually donate. And we would appreciate it greatly. Or if you want to kick it old school, we have tip jars over here.
It's hip to tip.
And for you may remember cash. So there's 3 things. We're asking for money for 3 people for 3 things today. One is for OTTO. We'd appreciate if you support the work of OTTO as we move forward. But also, we're very happy immediately following this presentation today. You're going to hear the incredible Hoyle brothers, who are carrying on the tradition of country music in Chicago that Mark wrote about. Bands like the Sundowners, if you guys remember that. I mentioned the Sundowners at the Old Town School. Do you guys remember the Sundowners? And I mentioned the Sundowners when I was talking about this event at the school today, and a woman came up to me, a student at the school. She said, "Yeah, I used to wait tables at their bar back in the day." I was like, "Wow!" So it just carries on. And the third thing down there, please do not forget to tip your bartenders always. Thank you so much for supporting. Let me just introduce. This is Mark Guarino. Look. Along with this incredible book, Mark is a celebrated journalist. He's written for more publications than I realized, and along with the Trib. Mark was, we know Mark just because he's a friend of the school. He's a friend of music in general. He covered the Old Town School in the past when the school thought about selling Armitage, and covered the rise of the union. He's a terrific journalist. He's written for the New York Times and the Washington Post and a billion other publications. Do you have anything else to say?
Thanks so much for being
Thank
here.
you so much for coming out. This is Mark Guarino. Good luck.
Testing. My fantasy always went through this. Testing 1 2 1 2. Seems kind of low.
Slow.
Hello here. All right, great. So thanks for coming, everybody. And boy, how do I start? I really wanted. So many of you are from the Old Town School, so I feel like we know so much about history. This event's really about the first 10 15 years of the school. As you know, the school really kind of came out of the folk revival of the 1950s. But I want to read a passage, really. I think this passage from the book is a really good setup for what we're going to talk about today. I wrote this a long time ago. You think I would know it, but I don't. So, the Old Town School of Folk Music, the first folk music school in the United States, and now the oldest still in operation, established Chicago as a primary center for the music during the 1950s folk revival. Strachey co-founded the school with Frank Hamilton, a wiry and enthusiastic guitar teacher from the West Coast, and Don Green, a homemaker and folk music major from Chicago's western suburbs. Together, they created a nonprofit school imbued with social consciousness. Learning guitar, singing, or dancing was considered a gateway to community. Before the Old Town School, music lessons were largely confined to private conservatories, accredited schools, and for-profit businesses. What still connects the Old Town School to Strachey's original vision is not necessarily the style of music heard there, but the populist approach to teaching music that continues to thrive in its classrooms and concert halls. And this is Win Strachey. Here we teach guitar and we teach banjo certainly, but most importantly, we teach the simple and exalted joy of the music that comes from the hills and valleys, the meadows and the mills, the fields and the hearts of people everywhere. He told an interviewer in 1969. Folk music doesn't belong to black folks or white folks or blue folks. It belongs to people. Today, the notions of a people's music may seem quaint, but in 1957, the ideal of music shared among races and across history was liberating, not just for the singer, but also for those emboldened by the song. So, I've been talking about this book for a couple months now, and one thing that I talk about a lot is kind of what's really there about the idea of a school that's, yes, it's about music and there are guitars, there's instruments, but it's really about this community work aspect of it, which was very, very different at the time. And also, what made it really, it was so different, it was considered radical and also was considered dangerous. In my book, when I was writing about it, Studs Terkel, of course, this shows up in the book a lot because he was very supportive of the music even though he wasn't a teacher. And Studs famously loved the fact that he was under surveillance by the FBI. He talked about it all the time, and he posted his FBI report to the internet. And I thought, well, if he was under surveillance, I wonder who else was. And so I went through a very long and very difficult task of dealing with the FBI to see if anyone with the Old Town School was under surveillance as well. And what I found was all three of those people I talked with were under heavy surveillance by the FBI for many years. And I think that speaks to the fact that how different the Old Town School was and how that community aspect of bringing people of all races and backgrounds together was maybe something that the government didn't really want to happen at the time. The second thing I want to also do before we get talking is, since this is a lot of teachers for the audience, I wanted to talk about really show you in a really quick way, those early teachers, how influential they are and how they were really part of what was happening in a national way, in a national trend of the folk revival. All of the teachers of the Old Town School were connected to what was underfoot, this rediscovery of folk music, of music that was recorded decades earlier, that in the 50s, the Smithsonian was reissuing, and so people were listening to these recordings for the first time, and these teachers were teaching that stuff for the first time. And so I thought, what better way to kind of show sort of the prominence of that early tier of teachers was to show their recordings. They all had national recordings and were part of that scene. So here we have Frank Hamilton, Stu Ramsey, who I interviewed for my book. Recorded, I think this is for Elektra Records. No, Mercury, yeah. Here's another Frank recorded a record with Felicia Buffington, who was born in Brazil, and she was an early teacher of world music with school. Of course, Ella Jenkins, this is one of her 5,000 records that she's released during her lifetime. It's an early one. Jenny Clemens, she recorded for Folkways, early children's teacher who was influenced by Ella Jenkins. The very influential Fleming Brown, who learned from Doc Hopkins, who was a WLS bar dance performer, who Fleming Brown would later teach Dave Prine in the early 60s, and Dave Prine then turned around and got John Prine involved with the school. So the lineage goes back through Fleming to the barn dance. And then the last one, 2 weekends ago, I was at the Country Music Hall of Fame, and I think some people heard me talk about this last weekend. They invited me to come and talk about what we're talking about here about Chicago. John Prine's family had a 3-day celebration of him throughout the city of Nashville, and so there was a panel discussion about John Prine in Chicago. So I was set up exactly like this with Bonnie Kolak, Greg Cahill, John Prine's son, and John Prine's widow, Fiona Prine. And for 90 minutes, we talked about Chicago. And of course, the Old Town School came up. And there was a backdrop behind us that they were showing photos of the Old Town School, and we were talking about it. And this was mostly a Nashville audience that really didn't know much about the school. And then the conversation turned to Win Strachey. And So I kind of went through and talked about Win and his influence in the Old Town School and why I consider him a very important national figure and very unsung figure nationally and especially in Chicago. And the moderator next to me, this guy from the R.J. Smith from the Hall of Fame, he said, "Well, wait a second, I want to show you all something." And on the screen, and then blown up, was this cover of this record, 1956 Americana by Win Strachey. And you could hear the whole audience go, "Oh." And he said, "There you go, Win Strachey, ahead of his time, Americana music." Right? So much so, and this was the dark Americana. These were not the happy children songs. He chose to introduce people to the really dark and the original folk songs that were kind of varnished during his time. And that was kind of a special moment, recognition for him down there. So, you all know the story, I'm sure, of the all three founders meeting at the Gate of Horn, and then going to Dawn Greening's living room to teach. And I live with these. So Ted Johnson here, I want to talk to you about the first, the first classes really were in Dawn Greening's house because they didn't have a space yet. And within a month, Win found that space on North Avenue, which was a few blocks from his house in Old Town. And that opening night, which was Win had invited so many of his friends, Dutch Turkle, a lot of Chicago Tribune writers, Herman Cogan, the novelist, Big Bill Burns, he was on stage with you. And I was wondering if you could talk about you were a student there and you were kind of doing a demonstration with Big Bill Brunsey, Frank Hamilton, and sort of showing sort of a visual of how they were going to teach this new way they were going to teach music at the school. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like?
That new way, it's the method that became the Old Town School. What's so fascinating is how this kind of came about in the country and especially in Chicago. I think there was something in the air in those days. Things were going on in Chicago for just the first folk club in the country. Al Grossman started the Gate of Horn, and musicians would come and perform there. And one of them was this genius kid called Frank Hamilton, and he had been in California under the influence of Alan Lomax's sister, Bess Hawes, who had been developing a system of getting people to teach them, not individual lessons where you get kind of self-conscious, but social music. You're playing with other people, and you're getting them a way to perform with each other. Well, Frank was nurtured by that particular method of teaching group classes. And he showed up at the Gate of Horn as a performer. And that's where the Guarino family enters into it, because music was happening at the Gate of Horn, and some of us started hanging out there. They'd have open mics on Sunday. And one of the people that came was Dawn Greening, and later she said to Frank, how would you like to help out your finances a little? Would you like to teach some classes at my house? And so, and then at this point, the school didn't exist yet, except perhaps as a gleam in Winstrocky's eye, because I was one of the people that came to those classes. I had just sort of picked up guitar a little on my own. And Winstrocky, who was a well-known Chicago singer already, not necessarily folk singer, he came to that class too. And so I still remember, I'll never forget, Winstrocky and I were both sitting next to each other in one of those classes. And meanwhile, Frank was doing this new method of teaching, trying out these lessons, this method. He'd take these people just learning and he'd say, okay, you do this with your hand, just do this, and we'll go back and forth. And then some of the better players already there, because he could handle different people in the same class with different methods, different skills of knowledge. He'd say, okay, you can do the chords, you start doing these things with he taught a fiddling, taught arpeggios. Meantime, some people had banjos. Well, how's that gonna fit in? Well, he'd take the banjos out into a separate room and teach them what to do. And then we'd get all together, and out of that came this music, which isn't like you went to some music academy and they started teaching everybody how to read notes and what a B flat was. And no, we made music socially out of this group, and that was the method. Well, this is one night while this was going on, Winstrocky was sitting to the right of me, and he said, you know, I'm going to start a school around this. And I think, and he did. And so that led to the opening night, where Dawn Greening had a lot to do with the organization of it. And so the big night came in December of 1957, and all the various literati of Chicago, various people were there. You know, something else that was going on in those days was Second City and the UFC Folk Festival. It was in the air, these things, but it came together on that night because they got one of the legendary, truly traditional musician performers there, Big Bill Brunsey, and Studs Terkel was there that night, and other people like that. So what is this new method? What is this thing that the Old Town School is going to do that's different? Well, let's show you. So there was a little demonstration lesson right there. There were several of us, 4 or 5 of us. I was one of them. Lance Greening, who is here today, Dawn Greening's son. He was one of our little class, and we sat there, and Bill Brunsey, the idea was Bill Brunsey played his fancy little riff, and Frank Hamilton, and there are photographs of this, you can see Frank is squinting at watching his fingers and what he's doing, and then he's got a blackboard up there because it helps to be able to notate what's going on, but not normal, ordinary musical notation, because you can't expect people to know how to do that. These are just ordinary folks who want to play, and we like to. So Frank has this tablature, this method. Put the thumb here, 1, 2, 3, and then Lance may remember this better than I. Bill plays the riff. Frank examines it, writes it down, takes several minutes teaching us what did he just do, and then we play it. By God, we played. Bill Bill Rhodes' riff. And one of the things I learned later about the joys of this kind of method, you can get a person, normally when a person's starting to play, it takes a long time before you have any fun with it. But this method, you can start doing it right away in a simple way. And I always remember this first time we got people playing a tune with 2 chords, say, and singing. Suddenly their faces break out in these grins. This is what happens. Well, that demonstration class happened the first night, and that was the beginning of the Old Town School.
Wow.
At that point, Big Bill Brucey was actually dying. He was an international star, and just a few weeks earlier, before that, there was a 2-day benefit for him to raise for medical costs. And so really, this was really the very end of his life. And I think, like, and for more context, he and Win Strachey and Studs Terkel in the late 40s presented sort of a cabaret show, that's probably the wrong word, but where they were presenting folk music. And it was the first time really in nightclubs. And they were doing that all through up into the early 50s, and really kind of to a paying audience, kind of moving the music in a completely different context. And that's before the Old Town School. And then the Gate of Horn gets into it because now there's money to be made. And it's part of this nightlife district. Then in 1961, the Old Town, the University of Chicago Folk Festival starts. So it's sort of, there's context for what's going on here. And then things are moving forward really actually pretty fast in that way. We should talk about the fact that almost within a couple of years, the school knew that folk music wasn't just labor songs, that it also was world music, but it also was dance. And the first person to incorporate the dance component was Nate Lofton. I interviewed Nate through you, Ted. Ted, you introduced me to Nate. I remember we had a great afternoon with him. And Nate's no longer with us. But Paul Collins, to my far left, took over the dance program from Nate. And Paul, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about Nate, who he was, and what type of person he was, and the dance program that you kind of encountered when you got to the school.
Okay, thanks for inviting me. I'm flattered to be invited to this and to speak. A little bit of background, I started dancing with my parents. They did square dancing with some ethnic folk dancing involved, but mostly squares and rounds. And you referred to Robert's Barn. Well, actually, they started the YMCA with a teacher by the name of Johnny Brooks. Anybody ever heard of Johnny Brooks? He was an Olympic, he was on the U.S. Olympic team that went to Berlin in the 30s. And he was a square dance caller, and one of the first black square dance callers in Chicago, not the first, but one. And so my parents and my mother started going to this group at the YMCA where Johnny Brooks was the instructor. And my father went to the Y to play bridge. He was an avid bridge player and written his own system in a book about bridge. And and then they decided to take me. And the reason they took me instead of getting a babysitter was that my grandfather, my father's father, had introduced me to ethnic music at a very young age. He liked to listen to these Chicago ethnic stations. They were on the high end of the dial, Ukrainian, Polish, and other types of Slovak music and stuff. He liked that. And he also liked country music. He listened to the National Barn Dance avidly and actually took me down to the 8th Street Theater at one point. So we were readily devoted to that kind of country music. And so when my mom started taking these square dance classes, I said, well, let's take Paul, because he likes this kind of music. So I went with them and, of course, watched, because I was just a kid and we were all adults dancing. Most of them were teachers. Well, the other teacher was Sam Roberts, who taught with my mother, Both my parents were teachers in the CPS. But Sam Roberts, after the Johnny Brooks class was over, Sam started a group in his basement. Now, what got my father involved was that during Johnny Brooks's class, they had a show after the first term, a presentation. This is in the 50th Street YMCA, if anybody knows where that is, 50th in Indiana. And so Dad came down to the show to watch, took a break from the bridge. Mom probably made him come. And he decided he started joining the class. The Dad had a history going back to the 30s because he was a teacher and he'd gone to Chicago Teachers College where he had to take dance classes. So he sort of revived his interest in dancing. And they did ballroom dancing and stuff like that at the Met on South Parkway. But they started both going square dancing. So I'm there and I'm dancing by myself. I had to envision 7 other people in the square dancing because I was just a kid. One day, an adult didn't show up. And what are they going to do? They had, one person short of 2 sets. And one of my parents' friends said, well, Paul's been dancing by himself. He probably knows how to do this stuff better than we do. And and my parents said, okay. So they put me in the set and I did, as expected, I did well because I'd been learning everything. On the way home, whenever I didn't understand something, I'd ask my parents to talk to me on the car on the way home and then show me when we got home how to do these figures. So I stepped right in and I never stopped dancing since then. That was 1955. So we got exposed every once in a while. Sam Roberts, when we were dancing at Roberts Bar in 7312 South St. Lawrence, Sam had a 3-flat, and in the basement, he created what was called Roberts Barn, which the guys in the group got down there and tiled the floor, because it was a concrete floor, and we had square dancing down there on Saturday nights. Now, this is very interesting, and it's hard for some people to imagine Black folks square dancing on a Saturday night, but I remember counting one night in this little basement, 8 squares, that's 64 people, with a few people sitting out. And we danced there, and every once in a while, Sam or one of the other callers would get invited, if anybody remembers the Hyde Park Neighborhood Club, and Fun Night. They had a night of folk dancing and square dancing, well, depending on who was leading. So every once in a while, Sam Roberts would get invited to Fun Night to lead, and that's where a lot of us got exposed to folk dancing. We did some, Sam and Johnny Brooks taught some ethnic folk dancing at the square dance group, and but we would see a lot more at Fun Night because there were people there in Hyde Park who did folk dancing at International House or at Ida Noyes Hall. So we got exposed there, and somehow, okay, I'm going to get the Nate Lofter connections coming right now. In '62, there was the Illinois State Square Dance Convention that came to Chicago. Now, it had been held in places like Peoria and Rockford and places like that in prior years. And square dancing, many people saw it as mostly a white activity, but there was about 7 or 8, maybe more Black groups in the South and West sides. My parents went once to one of the events in Gage Park, which was 55th and Western, and the field house there. That was pretty, anytime you want to cut me off, do so, because I can go all night.
Well, actually, you were talking about where you met Nate at that
convention. I was just going to say that the white community was not really welcoming to Black dancers in those days, in the 50s and early 60s. So by 62, they brought the Illinois State Square Dance Convention to Chicago, and a few of us decided to go. Not everybody in the group was ready to be humiliated, possibly. And so me and my partner and about another set or 2 of people went. My parents didn't go. And what would happen is you'd start in your own square, and then after the caller finishes, everybody would mix up and get into different squares, new people. So at the end, my partner and I, what do? We decided we'll try to integrate, quote unquote, a square. So we got in, people were welcoming to us and dance. So we did a tip with this new caller. Then there was another break, and new caller came on. We got into a set, and all people looked at each other and said, "Well, we think we're going to sit this one out." So we were left standing there, and this fiery redhead, Regina Paulson, was the mother-in-law of Frank Alsberg, who was a folk dance teacher and a caller. But Regina started going around and cussing out white people for doing that kind of thing. And so she made people come and dance with us. And eventually most of the black folks got dancing with other squares. At one point, my partner and I decided to take a break, and we were walking down to, I'm like 18 or so, and we're not supposed to be drinking. We're walking to the bar. And we passed this room, and I see, what's this? And there's all these folk dancers that I knew from the Hyde Park Neighborhood Club in there. And there was this black man leading a Greek dance called the Tsamikos, which is a Greek dance that I knew. And I said, "Oh, what the heck?" And it was Nate Lofton. And so we went in. My partner wasn't that interested, but I stayed for pretty much the rest of the evening in the folk dance room at the square dance convention. And afterward, I started talking with Nate. And he told me about his group at the Old Town School in North and Sedgwick. And other people saying, "Yeah, go, the Immigrant State Bank, that's what it says." And so I started taking the L after school on Wednesdays. I would go to Nate's group. And so one day I decided to tell my father I'm going to Nate Lofton's folk dance group. And my father says, "Nate Lofton doesn't know anything about folk dancing." I say, "Yeah, he does. He has a group." And my father says, "No, not the Nate Lofton I know." So it turns out that this was Nate's father, who was also named Nate. Nate was not a junior, but his father was Nate. And Nate's father and my father had been friends when they were young. Played on the CYO basketball team. A little side story there. Nate was Catholic, and a number of other people were Catholic. My father wasn't. And when they won a championship, the priest gave my father and a couple other players the ultimatum: convert to Catholicism, or you can't play with CYO, Catholic Youth Organization. Anyway, so anyway, I finally got a night when Nate would get his father, and I'd get my father to come to Nate's group at the Old Town School. And so they came, and they hadn't seen each other in probably 30 odd years. And they had a great time talking with each other. They even got them to dance one or two dances. Nate's father didn't dance. My father was a dancer. He was a square dancer, and he did some folk dancing and taught some also. So I found it real interesting after this big reunion, after 30 odd years, they never exchanged phone numbers and never contacted each other again. But they had a great time that night. Anyway, I started going with Nate's group a lot. And it opened the door to other folk dance groups that I went to, as I met people there and said, "Hey, why don't you try this group?" So Nate decided to end the folk dancing program around 1970. Yeah, he ended the folk dancing, and Nate was really, would you say, chagrined or pissed off that that one just ended the program. So he kind of left and found a place at the downtown YMCA. Anybody remember that? Downtown Y? Anyway, at that point, about 4 years later, Ray Tate wanted to bring folk dancing back, and he asked Nate, and Nate said, "Hell no, I'm not interested." And so Ray said, "Can you recommend someone?" And Nate recommended me. I was leading groups at the University of Chicago, where Skip Lent was the director of student activities. Always gave the folk dance group a rough time. But anyway, Skip was a great guy. Anyway, so Nate recommended me, and so I met Ray, and so in '74, like August or something like that, I restarted the folk dance group at the Old Town School. It's a brand new group, all new people. the hotshot dancers kind of didn't like the group because we were all beginners. Okay, so we built that group up, and after about a year, the hotshots looked and said, "Oh, these people can dance, so no, come." So we had that from about 75 through about 82, we had about 100 people a night at Brunsey Hall. Sometimes 120. I mean, it's like phenomenal years of folk dancing, and we ended that program in about 73 or so, and then Jim Hirsch invited me back probably around the late 70s for a couple of years to do some classes. This was the group that we had at the Old Town School was like Nate's group. It wasn't a class, it was just an open group that people came to and attended. And Nate's group drew about 60, 70 people a night. And I've got some pictures of that group. If you're interested, I can tell you on my website where you can find those pictures. I have a history of Chicago folk dancing that I've been putting together.
You're going to do a little presentation or an example of that today.
No, we are going to do. When I say we, collectively, I'm going to help you, and we're going to do some ethnic dances so you get a feeling of what.
All right, let's do it. Our call. Take it away.
Oh, you want to do that right now?
Yeah.
All right, those of you who are ready, willing, and able to dance, stand up, and I'll show you a couple of things. How much time do you have? Oh, so just 2 minutes.
Yeah,
We're gonna do one dance.
One dance.
We're going to do it sort of in the style that we got to be careful. We don't want to knock the computer here. But come on over and join me. And we're dancing around the tables. Now, when I talked to you about dancing in the Serbian restaurant, that's how we did it. We danced around the table, so there's no dance floor. Join in. So we're gonna do one dance.
Sometimes you think of things you might have said.
That's a brass band, and it's from Turkey. And if I had one dance to teach, this would be it. It's a real easy dance. So join in, about shoulder height here, and we're going to walk 3 steps to the right, starting with your right foot. It's usually good. Okay, so we're going to walk 3 steps. 1, 2, 3, and then left to left. And we're going to go back the other way. 1, 2, 3, and lift. Repeat. 1, 2, 3. Now with the left foot. Left, 2, 3. Now we're going to take 1 step. 1 and lift, and 2 and lift, and 3 and lift, and 4 and lift. Okay. After that 4th one, we point the right foot in front, side, and close. And we clap 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the whole dance. It's called Domat. Domat is a dance that's done it's not an old traditional dance, it's more of a modern Turkish, they call it halay. And but that's it. Now, when we go to the right, we take normal steps. We go back to the left, take smaller steps. So there's a progression to the right. So let's try it. Right, left, right, lift the left, left, right. Small steps. Now go in big steps. Right, 2 small steps to the left. 1, 2. Now step lift. Step right and lift, left and lift. 3 and 4 point front, side, close. Over 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah! Let's dance
güzeli kız. Haydi havaya, eller havaya. Seni gördüm göreli, divane oldum benim. Seni gördüm göreli, divane oldum benim. Gel bana güzel kız, kalbimi çalan hırsız. Haydi havaya, eller havaya. Abim damat oluyor, sıra bana geliyor. Abim damat oluyor, sıra da bana geliyor. Gel bana oraya kız, gözleri sürmeli kız. Haydi havaya, eller havaya. Abim damat oluyor, sıra bana geliyor. Abim damat oluyor, sıra da bana geliyor. Gel bana güzel kız, kalbimi çalan hırsız. Haydi havaya, eller havaya. Gönlüm sana vurdu, düğünlerde kuruldu. Bizim olayın sesi öbür köyden duyuldu. Gel bana oraya kız, gözleri sürmeli kız. Haydi havaya, eller havaya. Gönlüm sana vurdu, düğünlerde kuruldu. Bizim olayın sesi öbür köyden duyuldu. Gel bana güzel kız, kalbimi çalan hırsız. Haydi havaya, eller havaya.
Someone accidentally didn't get married in the middle of that, did they? Paul, thank you so much. And thanks all of you. That's great. We're going to continue our conversation here, and we're kind of going to move forward a little bit in time. And this gentleman to my right, Ed Holstein. Ed, you grew up in the South Shore, and as a young man, you heard about the Old Town School, and you were talking to me about what you first thought it was when you thought it was an actually.
Well, I thought it was a school,
Yeah.
an institutional building with a play lot, monkey bars, people playing softball, and so I came from South Shore, which is a very middle class, sedate neighborhood. And I thought Chicago ended it, ran off for Michigan, and he went right into Ohio. And so I was real confused. I was only 13 years old. So I got on the subway at 63rd and Stony, got downtown, and I asked somebody how to get to 333 North Avenue, which was very confusing because us Southsiders, we always needed 4 numbers to find where we were. You know, with 7836 Kingston, so 333 didn't make any sense to me. So this fella told me, well, you just get off of Clybourne. So I got on subway, got off at Clybourne, and back then, this was 1960, there weren't a lot of trattorias around Clybourne. There were a lot of liquor stores and taverns. I never saw so many liquor stores and taverns in my life. In my neighborhood, there were a lot of delicatessens and a couple of liquor stores, but I was pretty nervous about where I was. I remember there was this place called the Barrel House on North Avenue, and then Sam's Liquor Store and Kale's, and I didn't know where I was. So I started going east. I figured, I'm looking for a school, a big building, and I almost get to the lake, and I realize I'm in trouble here. I don't know where I'm at. So I headed back west. I crossed Well Street, and I saw Arvella Gray. He was a blues singer, street singer, and I figured, I'm getting close. And so I kept going west, and then I found that there was a card that said Old Town School of Folk Music in the door. It was on the 2nd floor. So I had called Dawn Greening. She was so nice. I told her I'm a young folk singer, and I want to see what's going on over there. You know, I was pretty precocious, and she took good care of me. I got upstairs, and she said, "Well, you want to visit some classes?" And which I did. I visited Ted's class, and a wonderful guy who became a mentor to us, my brother, by the name of John Carbo, visited his banjo class. And I just wanted to be around people that liked the same thing I liked, because not a lot of people were into folk music, still aren't. You know, I realized that when I used to, I would buy records like Texas prison songs and bring them to parties. And people didn't like that. I go to a friend of mine's house. He had a new hi-fi, and I brought a Gene Ritchie, Oscar Brand courting ballads from Southern Appalachian Mountain. And my friend's sister's football boyfriend almost broke my arm after he said, "Please turn that off." So I figured I got to be around people that like folk music.
Well, I want to ask you, when you were at the school, it was 1960 when you showed up, or something, and you were taking Ted's class. Can you describe what those classes were like?
I was visiting.
Yeah.
I was just visiting.
Yeah.
It was. I don't know how to describe it. I was just so bewildered by the fact that there was all these people, like Ted mentioned, they were learning how to play songs right away. And before that, I was around a place called the Fresh Shop in Hyde Park, and all these hot guitar players, Michael Bloomfield, all these guys from the UFC were really great guitar players. But we felt kind of, I just wanted to learn a few things and get a song down right away. And that's what they were doing. And I was playing guitar, just whacking at the guitar. And I thought I knew some stuff until Frank, during the second half, sang Streets of Glory, and he did a bass run, which I never saw before. I thought, well, I got a lot to learn. So I spent the afternoon there, and Dawn was so gracious and so nice. And she said to me, "Listen, tell the boys we're ready for them." I said, "What's that? Who's that?" The Clancy brothers are downstairs. They're going to do the second half. They were playing at the Gate of Horn. I said, the Clancy brothers? And I was, so I walked downstairs and I opened the door, and there they were, the Clancy brothers. And I said, hey, fellas, they're ready for you. And they did the second half. And it was so remarkable because the place was much smaller back then. And now Liam was whacking the guitar pretty good, but he was a great singer. And they had no microphone. He did about 4 songs, and I was just so amazed that that could be done. That these people can just do this music, this really interesting music, and without any frills or anything going on, no monitors or whatnot, no light show, just the song. And so it was a couple of years later that my brother Fred got a job over at the Old Town School. He was working at the Folklore Center, and then he became part of the family. He joined a group with John Carver called the Frets. And then I came in and started working there in like 64, I think. And I became part of the gang over there. So that's, but I never took any lessons there, to be honest with you.
And Fred Holstein, boy, you really can't talk about the folk music scene in Chicago without Fred, because Fred was he was in a group of songwriters. We associated him with all the songwriters with the Earl of Old Town, but he wasn't a songwriter. He was someone who sang traditional folk songs because I found all these interviews with him, and you could tell how passionate he was about having those songs continue to play and not die.
Well, there were two. Again, Fred brought home records. He brought home a Bob Gibson record, and we were getting a little tired of rock and roll at that point. I Love You, Baby, Don't Drive Me Crazy got a little tedious after a while. So all these songs that were so interesting, and but again, when Fred started performing, folk music was starting to die down. When he was starting to get some gigs, folk rock came in, and people were starting to run away from folk music. So a lot of my life was being around people that didn't like folk music, and but there was no way Fred was going to join a band and schlep up, equipment around. So he stayed with the guitar, and there was only a few of them. Him, Ginny Clemens, Terry Collier. This is 1966, because by then people didn't really want to hear folk music. They want to hear blues bands and rock and roll, and the San Francisco sound and blah, blah, blah. So Chicago became a focal point. A lot had to do with the school was still in business. Enrollment started to go down a little bit, but they were hanging in. And the Earl of Old Town started with folk music. Everyone thought he was crazy. But Fred did, he was the first person to do any John Prine songs or Steve Goodman songs, but he also did traditional songs. And so he hung in there, and then eventually a scene grew out of that. By 1968, Monty Cola came to Chicago. And after the convention, that changed a lot. He developed a big following. So then all of a sudden, clubs started popping up, but only in Chicago, not in the country. In fact, Walter Cronkite had a show on CBS, the news show. Saturday, he had Roger Mudd take over for him, and they did a whole thing in 1973 on folk music in Chicago. And Roger Mudd started off by saying, folk music people think is dead in the country, but it's alive and well in Chicago, and they did something at the school, and there's about a dozen clubs.
Yeah, there's, and at that time also, there's folk schools kind of patterned at the Old Town School showing up around the country. The Denver Folklore Center as well.
Right, much smaller.
And, small, of course, yeah. But I think that the influence of the Old Town School, people were seeing that model, and so things were popping up around the country. And then in the 70s, as you said, so that second folk boom happened that Greenwich Village had died, but it would really kind of start taking off here in the 70s. And tell me about the relationship between the school and also these clubs that were popping up.
Well, it's when you're in the middle of it, I'm thinking about it now, and your book was very helpful, reminding me of all that. You're so close to it and so correct on it. It really just happened. It's hard to say, except that there was nothing happening in the village. I was in San Francisco in 1968, and there was not much happening there. There were a couple clubs. And I came back here, and the Quiet Night had opened up. Not the big Quiet Night that people remember. It was a smaller club on Wells. And again, the Earls was going on, and the Bulls, and Digby's, and all kinds of places. So the school was still there, and then they moved over to Armitage. I think that was in '68, and because they were having a lot of problems on North Avenue after the convention, the rioting and everything. And all of a sudden, in the early '70s, people from different parts of the country started coming here, from Pittsburgh, from St. Louis, blah, blah, blah. And the rents were pretty cheap back then in the '70s, and so they get a group of people, the young people together, and they get a big apartment in Rogers Park and split the rent. And so, you come up with $100 a month for your part, and there's a dozen clubs to work. And the school, what they did was they booked more traditional people, people that normally didn't work clubs. They booked Jimmy Driftwood, they had Doc Watson, and they did a workshop, and Will Holt, people like that, and they weren't in the business of doing a lot of shows at that point. So they were a foundation, and they had all-night parties and blah, blah, blah. So it was a scene that grew out of that. It was a different world. There was no computers, no VCRs, and we were out all night, and we drank a lot and frolicked.
Well, I don't want to get into the frolicking.
Yeah,
it's a family audience. So Ed, why don't you do one of your songs for us that you wrote during that time?
I didn't mean to write this song. It was an accident. I just used to arrange songs, old folk songs. And these words came to me. Whoops. And you got a good song when people start doing your song. People that don't know you, don't care about you, never met you. Recently, I got word that the guy who played in Starsky and Hutch recorded my song. Now that's big. Black-eyed sweet thing, sugar loose, call me when I'm clean off of a one-way juice. Just like a jazz man with the Sunnyland blues, just off these streets trying a trick or two, trick or two, trick or two. Just like a jazz man trying a trick or two. Hold me up, let me fly, give me a sweet kind spirit to swing by. Honey, won't you call out your train time? I'm waiting on you for your one slow ride. One slow ride, one slow ride. Needs to know your train time to catch your ride. Way up and out and wide and deep, put it to use and you put it to sleep. Red hot and ready, light on my feet. I'm easy to get to and I'm easy to please. Easy to please, easy to please. When you're a jazz man, you get easy to please. Black-eyed sweet thing, sugar loose. Call me when I'm clean off of a one-way juice. Just like the jazz man with the Sunnyland blues. Just off these streets, trying a trick or two. Trick or two, trick or two. Just like a jazz man trying a trick or two.
So, a lot of what we've been talking about today, what's so, in writing this book that really kind of came out for me was the community aspect of the school. And it could be a community in so many ways. The Old Town School was in the neighborhoods, so many different parts of its lifespan. When Uptown was really a blighted neighborhood of poverty, people struggling to get by, the Old Town School had set up a remote little space there to help the Appalachians transition, providing guitars and all sorts of assistance. They were in Cabrini Green. The Old Town School was really had a major presence throughout the school as Chicago itself was changing. The other community aspect of it, of course, I don't tell you teachers this, is between the teachers and the students. It's something completely unique, I think, to really any school, traditional schools, and that sort of continual relationship between the teachers and students that exists over years, and the students discovering something about themselves through that ongoing relationship that exists in the classroom, outside the classroom. And for that reason, we wanted to bring up a student from the Old Town School. Her name is Flo Estes, and for many years she had taken Steve Dawson's class. Steve can't be here because he has COVID, so we wish him well. But earlier this year, Steve recorded a record of Flo's songs because he thought they were very special and that she had written during his course of taking his class. And I think she's still taking his class, right? Yeah, she's still in that class. And so, and it's a beautiful record, and I think it's great to show sort of the continuation of the spirit of what the school's all about. So I give you Flo Estes.
I am so grateful that I have been invited to do this and to do it in front of all these legends. Makes me a little nervous. And I loved Mark's book. I keep coming to his things and I keep forgetting to bring my book so he can autograph it. But I think his chapter on the O-Town School is just so amazing, and we owe him a great debt of gratitude for that. I was also a union organizer most of my adult life, so I'm so glad that you guys. And I know it's the beginning stages, and they're always really mean to you. At least for the first or second contract, but eventually they'll realize you're here to stay, and so stay with it. One of the things that I noticed in Mark's book, WLS, was all the people coming up from Kentucky who were on the show. They were looking for better economic opportunities, but also they brought their music with them. And it made me think of my father, who was from Kentucky. And he taught me some rudiments of guitar, and he also played harmonica. And he sang a lot of those songs that later, when I started taking classes at Old Town School, they were in the book, you know, like I'll Fly Away, and I did a song called Speckled Bird, and We'll Go Fishing in the Crawdad Hole was our family favorite. So my dad also taught me to sing harmony, and he also happened to be a really good dancer. So I feel like we come full circle. We did dancing too, and we lost him in 2008. He had Alzheimer's, and this is a song about my father. In the end, he didn't know my name. I was a stranger in a picture frame. Still he remembered his favorite tunes, and he sang every night, and he sang all night to the moon. There was never anybody to blame. Somehow the wires got crossed in his brain. He could still sweep me up like the broom, and we'd waltz together across the living room. You could lose your shirt playing Scrabble with him. He never boasted, but he'd always win. For every letter he had to use, nobody was better when it came to the X's and the Q's. When his words flew away, the lights went dim. We never played that game again. But he cha-cha-cha to dance off the blues. The man still had magic inside of his shoes. And if you can still talk, you can sing. Even if you think you lost everything. If you're staring out the window in a paralytic train, you could get up, and if you could still walk, you can dance. It's hard to lose a person, big bad bit. You never really know when this is it. He was nearly gone, but he had a little glow, like watching the stars that died a long time ago. There came a time he couldn't stand on his feet. He lost his voice and he couldn't speak. We were hoping for fast, but the end came slow. He was somebody I was lucky. I was oh so lucky. I was more than lucky to know. And if you can still talk, you can sing. Even if you think you lost everything. If you stare out the window in a paralytic train, you could get up, and if you could still walk, you can dance. And if you can still talk, you can sing. Even if you think you lost everything. If you're staring out the window in a paralytic train, you could get up, and if you could still walk, you can dance. You can dance. You can dance. You can dance. You can dance.
give a minute or a couple minutes for questions before we end, but and before we end, I also want to thank Lance Guarino for being here. Thanks so much. And thanks for being here. And also I want to thank Jim Hirsch over here for being here. Thank you, Jim. Really neat to and Ted, I want to give you the last word. You were there when the Old Town School started the first day, and I want to ask you how the school changed your life and the lives of the people around you who were there that day and in those early years.
You know, I think that connects nicely with your book, with this Chicago phenomenon widened out and influenced so many. Well, for me personally, it just happened. I was a rather indifferent student and hanging around the Old Town School, and they made me an apprentice teacher. And then I was teaching, and I thought to myself, hey, teaching, that's kind of cool. And it occurred to me, maybe I go back to schools and do that myself. So I did that. I went back to graduate school, ended up with a PhD and started teaching college. But that is, meanwhile, it was well, one of the things that happened to me personally, since I was a skier, I used to yodel a lot, and yodeled around the school. And somebody said, why don't you teach a yodeling class? So I did. My God, that shit hit the fan. I mean, the Chicago Tribune found out about it, made a story, and then got national news. I was my 15 minutes of fame because Scott Simon, the NPR, one of his Saturday programs, he said, here's Ted Johnson, teaches Old Town School yodeling. And can you teach me? And I said, sure, let's try it. So we did it for about 4 minutes, and he actually did it. Then he said, I think I threw out my bag. But meanwhile, this thing that was happening at the school, which had to do with country, I think a lot of what we were doing was coming into the category of country music, but we were doing something that was widening out. Frank Hamilton and that whole method. In fact, there's recently been a documentary come out. Frank Hamilton and what is it? Frank Hamilton and the folk revival. This is just recently. So it was something spreading out, and I look forward to finding out even more about it. Country music in Chicago.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks to all you guys. Thanks to everybody for coming out today. We're going to finish up with one last thing, and that is, so there's been several mentions made of the second half, and if you haven't been around at the Old Town School ever, the second half is the longest running tradition at the Old Town School. And what it is, after every night of the classes, everybody meets in their own rooms, and then all the classes get together, and the teachers stand up in front, and the students have their guitars out, and we just lead a big sing-along. And
so much fun.
And it is so much fun. We have a testimonial. And so the word on the street is that the very first song that was done at the very first second half was the Salute John B. And so in a moment, any teachers who are here, like Bill Bricky, and we're going to come up and we'll lead everybody in the Salute John B. But before we do that, a couple things. First of all, we want to acknowledge the passing of Ray Tate this week. Yeah. And Ray was one of the early executive directors. Did he hire you, Jim?
Yes.
Yeah, and so we just want to thank Ray for all of his contributions to culture in the world, because as we learned from Mark's book, it's like what an incredible legacy the Old Town School continues to make across the entire country and around the world.
And I think Ray Tate helped steer the school more into more into country music than perhaps it had been. Yeah. Which was nice.
And the last thing I'll say is, right when we're done, remember the Hoyle brothers are going to play. Give it up for the Hoyle brothers.
Steve Doyle over there in the corner. Steve Doyle was our colleague. Old Town School teacher, remember?
And so what that means is you'll notice this is a dance floor. And so as soon as we're done, as soon as you guys are done singing the Sloop John B with us, we're going to jump up. Well, you guys are going to jump up, and we're going to move all these tables out and make them real pretty so that people can dance. Oh, and also, don't forget, if you want to donate to OTTO, we'd really appreciate it. There's a QR code there. But also, tip the Hoyle brothers, because live music is where it's all at, baby. Teachers up here.
They wouldn't be here if it weren't for CJ Hawkins.
No, there's going to be a scene with
And we never have any amplification at the school except for one vocal mic, so this will be just like it really is. G, kids! Here we go! We come on the Sloop John B, my grandfather and me, around Nassau town we did roam. I drink it all night, got into a fight. I feel so broken, I wanna go home. Say, the horse up to John B. sail. Let's see how the mainsail set. Stand for the captain ashore, let me go home. I got to go home. I wanna go home. Yeah, I feel so broken. I wanna go home. First mate, the first mate, he got drunk. Broke up the captain's run. Constable, come aboard, take it away. I miss you, John Snow. Why don't you leave me alone? I feel so broken. I wanna go home. So hoist up the John B. sail. Sail out the mainsail, sail out the mainsail, sail on the captain ashore. Let me go home. Let me go home. Let me go home. Let me go home. I wanna go home. I feel so broken. I wanna go home. My students, I don't hear you. Well, the first book, he got the fits. Threw away all of my writs. Then what? Then he went and ate up all of my pork. What you wanna do? I want to go home. I wanna go home. Why? This is the worst trip I've ever been on. Last time! So what's up to John B. sail? Stay out the mainsail, stay out the mainsail, sail for the captain ashore. Let me go home. Let me go home. I wanna go home. Let me go home. I wanna go home. I feel so broken. I wanna go home. I just talked to this person. He said, "Oh, we're taking lessons." Let's move these cables. All right. Yep.
All right, get those tables.
Thanks so much for watching.